Hello, friends. I'm back with another video after a long time. There was a lot of personal interruptions during the intervening time, but here I am again, and it's Ilayaraja versus Rahman. This is part one of I don't know exactly how many installments. Let's see, because there's a whole bunch of topics that we could discuss in connection with this subject. But at the outset, let me disappoint you and tell you that I am a fan of both composers. So do not expect to receive a definitive answer as to who's the best out of the two after watching these videos. The idea is more to compare their approaches and, in terms of how they compose and let's say, what qualities they value more and how that influences their music. A long time back, okay, when I say long time back, I mean maybe 5 to 6 years back, in a discussion online, I said the difference between the two is that Ilayaraja is a sculptor and Rahman is an architect. So I think a good place to start the series would be to elaborate on that analogy. So, what do I mean by sculptor versus architect? So, my point is that Rahman focuses, or at least used to in the 90s, used to focus more on the overall structure of the song and used to try to make it sound very different right out of the gate, right on the surface level compared to anything else that you had heard before in film music. While with Ilayaraja, the beauty, the genius is in the little details. So it's like, let's take two structures, in fact, to illustrate this difference. Um, if you go to pretty much any old temple in South India, especially in Tamil Nadu, you find that from the outside they all have a very similar look. There is that gopuram, as we call it, and they have these pillars at symmetrical intervals on the sides. But you walk up close and you see how many minute details there are in the sculpture of the gopuram, as well as the pillars and pretty much every other part of the temple. There's such intricate rock work to be observed in these temples that were built, many of them like thousands of years ago. So that is Ilayaraja in my view. The idea is that on the surface it might sound like regular film music, although I would say that to me it didn't really sound like, say, the old Hindi film music or the work of MS Vishwanathan, even on the surface level, like from, say, the age of 14 or 15, when I really began to look into the differences in the styles of composers. Right from that time, it was very clear to me that his music was something else. But keeping that aside, I can understand that at the surface level, it sounds like what you would expect from film music. But then you listen deeply and you see that, oh, there's a bass line that's singing its own story in a parallel track to the vocal layer. Then there may be chords played on guitar or keyboard, and then there might be a string accompaniment. Sometimes, especially in the interludes, you may find that there's a counterpoint even between string sections. So there are actually so many things going on beneath the surface. And then when you start to pay attention to that, then that's when you find that his work is like an ocean that you can just get lost into. You go on plumbing the depths, and still you haven't, you know got your fill, reached, say, the bottom of that ocean. It's a journey that never seems to end. Whereas with Rahman, let's take another structure from of much more recent vintage compared to say the temple at Srirangam, uh, the Eiffel Tower in Paris. So the Eiffel Tower, when you look at it up close, there isn't really that much to it, in at least in terms of little details in the design. See, it might be very complex structure in its own right to build from an architectural point of view, but when you observe it, the beauty isn't necessarily in little details, but just the shape of the structure itself. It's so imposing and grand. Even from a distance, it stands out. It think about it. It was built in a Paris which already had the Champs Elysees, and still it stands out and is just considered one of the most iconic structures in the world. And that to me is the essence of Rahman's music. Right, right at this very surface level, right at a structural level, he did so many things that were so new, so distinct in film music. So, for example, you take the song Ooh La La from Minsara Kanavu or Sapne in the Hindi version. You have that little mouth organ break which comes out of nowhere, and from that, when that is over, they transition into a different beat, a different tempo compared to what the previous portion of the song was in. And he does something similar in Strawberry Karne, or you call it Strawberry Aankhein in Hindi. uh, at a certain point, there is a kind of we call it the street kind of music, street kind of percussions in the song, which otherwise sounds kind of fox operatic, you could say. uh, like a pseudo operatic, kind of a caricature of operatic music, which theatrical, you could say, theatrical, yeah. So from that theatrical milieu, it shifts into this street kind of music, and then finds its way back into the say the lead melodic lead motif. So those kind of things we had never heard before in film music. And there I'm still only talking about changes within a song. He also introduced a whole bunch of genres that we hadn't heard before. Like there had never been a song like Better Rap in film music before Rahman composed it. It's as simple as that. And that's one of many examples, a whole bunch of genres that he introduced. If you read my book Raga to Rock, I've listed down the genres that Ilayaraja used to be fond of, and whereas the ones that Rahman brought in, which hadn't been explored so much by other composers, including Ilayaraja himself. So he sought to differentiate himself in this very in your face obvious way. It's like even somebody who hasn't even got much of an appreciation of film music, hasn't heard much of what the composers of different eras had done, would still be able to point to Rahman's music and say, oh, this is completely different. That's basically the approach that he chose. And he has been candid about it. He said that when came to the scene, then he looked at what Ilayaraja, M.S. Vishwanathan, and the greats of Hindi music had all done. So for him, there wasn't a choice. He felt like it was a compulsion to differentiate himself in an obvious standout manner. And that's why I said Rahman is an architect. So it's not that the details in the house are what make his say his work stand out. Though there are interesting details in his songs, it's not surface level music uh, by itself, that you just listen to it one or two times and then after that you've got had your fill. It's that even from a distance you would be able to identify this style of building a house as something very distinct. Whereas with Ilayaraja, he fits into a style that we embrace as Indian film music, I should say. That okay, yeah, this is film music for people who like film music, but with a very big difference when you go into the details. So let's come up with another kind of crude example. Uh, Now I'm going to hop from architecture into cars. I think that's natural given that I worked in the auto industry for many years. So anyway, let's say that Rahman's music is like a BMW high-end car. So it just stands out immediately. But what if uh, take the Skoda range? So this is something that a lot of people who are not really into cars may not be aware of. But let's take the Skoda range. The Skoda Rapid and the Skoda Superb don't look a whole lot different, though you can tell that the Skoda Superb is bigger. But did you know that the Skodas and the BMWs actually share the same engine? Yeah, I bet you didn't know that. So actually, when you are driving a Skoda Superb, you're getting the engine performance of a high-end BMW, but you just don't know it. Unless, of course, you are a discerning automobile enthusiast, in which case you have pulled out the details of the engine specs and all that. But whereas with a BMW, it's very, very obvious that this is a different class of car just by looking at it. So you could say that that essentially is the difference. And that also, I think, speaks to the attitudes from some sections of the fans. I won't say all by any means, but I'm not going to keep it all hunky dory and nice, nice, all sunshine. Let's flesh out some of these unsavory aspects as well. And I'll be coming back to that in the other installments of the series. So here's what I'm about to say, that that it for the Rahman Rams, a certain section of Rahman fans are really obsessed with this obvious difference that underlines his music, because it fulfills a certain elitism that they may have in their taste. It's like for them, it Rahman is an obviously superior product. They don't have to debate this because they can just point to the sound production itself to establish how world class it is. Whereas I think I remember one Ilayaraja fan saying that Ilayaraja essentially makes music for Tamil listeners. I don't completely agree with that sentence. I think that his vision is much more universal, but I get what he's striving at, and that is that the ambitions of Ilayaraja's music weren't necessarily to reach, say, some, let's say, suit clad classical jazz snob in living in Fifth Avenue, Manhattan. He was content, you could say, with making music that would be played in town buses for years and years. If I don't know if town buses are still a thing in some or the other form, and if they are, then you bet that his songs would still be being played on on those journeys. And it's like, so town buses, TV channels, radio stations, as long as he at least allows you to play the songs, then you will find them being played somewhere. Though that aspect of obviously appearing to belong to an upper strata of society is not very important when it comes to Ilayaraja's music, or and the way his fans perceive it. But it may for certain section of Rahman fans. I'm not saying all, certainly not me, for instance, because I like all the great film music that there has been, period. But for let's say that there are people who look down on film music, then I can certainly imagine that for them, Rahman's music represents something a cut above the rest, and that is important to them. So that that's basically the rub as far as this video goes. So I mentioned that they like the fact that it represents something more exclusive, shiny, or elite, whatever. uh, we in college or in say young adult days, we used to call that as trying to be cool. So that will be the theme of the next installment of the series. uh, Rahman's music is about being cool. I'm not saying that necessarily in the sense of being snobbish, though that could be something that appeals to a section of his fans. But, anyways, if Rahman's music is about being cool, then what is Ilayaraja's music about? So, we'll have to wait for part 2 to find out. Until then, see you. Tata. Bye bye.